Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Learning Mishna is Chagigah, Perek Gimel, Chapter 3, Mishnah Beis, Mishnah 2. Okay. Kalim hanigmarim b'tahara, vessels that were completed in a state of purity, tzrich and tevila la kodesh, they still need to be put in a mikveh to be used for kodesh, be used for sacrifice meat, abaloy truma, but not to use for truma. Now, the rule is that a utensil will not become tameh, will not become impure, unless it is completed. Even if it comes to contact with the impurity of a dead body, a zav, no matter what. If it is not completed, if it's not yet completed, it is not susceptible to tumah. Anything can touch it, nothing's going to happen to it. Now, in our case, we're talking about where the vessel was completed, but it was protected by what's called a chaver. A chaver, we already learned, is someone who is very careful and proficient in the laws of tum and tahara, a purity and impurity. So you've got this chaver who is completing this vessel. He's watching it to make sure that nothing impure touches it, and he's reliable for that. So we want to know. So you finish the vessel. He's watching it. He's a reliable guard from tumah. Everything should seemingly be fine. It should be considered a pure vessel. So the Mishna says like this: if you want to use it for truma, then we say it's pure. You want to use it for sacrifice meat, we don't consider it pure. You actually have to put it in the mikveh first, and then you can use it for the carbon meat. Why? What's the concern? I mean, it's being guarded. It's being guarded by a reliable person. What's the issue?
The raw materials. No?
What's wrong with it? Raw materials?
I mean, whatever is.
Raw materials aren't acceptable to tumah. They're not a kli. They're not acceptable to tumah.
Okay.
So the issue is like this. And don't forget also, I believe here in this case, it is the chaver who is actually one making it. So, he's watching over everything to make sure. But again, they're not acceptable to tumah unless they become unless they become a utensil. But the concern is like this. And again, it's a kind of a bit of a not typical concern, which is why you want to use it for truma. We're not going to be concerned. But being that we're always stricter when it comes to what we want to use for carbon meat, we're going to be stricter here and be concerned that perhaps something got by him. What could have gotten by him? So we say that perhaps before the vessel was completed, he was next to a zav. Did he know it was a zav or not? I don't know. Doesn't know. He was next to a zav, and the zav talked, and some of his spit went out of his mouth, and went onto the vessel. Now the spit of a zav is tameh, so now it goes onto the vessel. Now the vessel, though, the assumption is that this, once the vessel was completed, the chaver would be watching it. I mean, he's on top of the situation. He would be very aware of what's going on if anything happened. But my understanding is the concern is that maybe, I mean, this is the way they explain it. The concern is that before the vessel was completed and before he was fully engaged in guarding it, because until then it's not susceptible to tumah, the zav spit on it. And when the vessel was completed, the spit was still there. They didn't notice it. And that would make it tameh at that point. If the spit is sitting on the vessel, when the vessel becomes completed, so now it's susceptible to tumah, and the source of tumah is there, it would make it tameh. That has to mean that it happened before the chaver, for the chaver was really on top watching it, which is before it was completed. So you can understand this is a bit of a far-fetched concern, which is why if you want to use this vessel for truma, you don't need to put it in the mikveh. But if you want to use it for sacrifice meat, as we're learning until now, the sages were stricter when it came to sacrifice meat, and therefore, even though the chaver completed it and he was guarding it, you got to put it into the mikveh before you can use it for carbon meat. Next, hakli mitzaref masha b'soicha la'kodesh avoloy la'truma. Translated means a vessel shall combine whatever is inside of it for carbon meat, but not for truma. So that means the following. Let's say you have pieces of truma, in a vessel. Separate pieces. We're not talking about one big piece. We're talking about separate pieces. Now, when you have one big piece, when you have one unit of something, if you touch part, if a source of tumah touches part of it, the whole thing becomes impure. It's not just where it touches, because it's one unit, it's one thing. It's considered the whole thing is touched. But let's say you have pieces, right? You have different pieces of truma in the vessel, and the source of impurity touches one piece. Would that affect the other pieces because they touch that piece? The answer is no. It would not affect it, because food does not make other food tamei, typically. That's the rule. Typically, food does not make other food tamei. There are situations where there are. But if truma were to go ahead and touch this truma that became tamei, were to touch other food or touch another piece of truma, it would not make a tamei. It doesn't spread the tumah, as we will soon see. So you've got pieces of truma in the vessel, and the source of tumah touches one piece. Is that going to make the other pieces tamei? The answer is no. It will not make the other pieces tamei, because they're separate pieces, and one piece doesn't make the other piece tamei. Okay. Now, actually, I'm missing a detail here. The detail here is the following. Okay. Actually, in this case, we are talking about not any tumah. We are talking about specifically a tvul yom. A tvul yom means the following. Under the laws of tumah, when someone immerses in a mikveh, some of his tumah is lifted, but he must await nightfall to become fully tahar. The term tvul yom, which means one who immersed that day, describes the status of a person between his immersion and nightfall. Okay, so we're specifically talking about a tvul yom. A tvul yom who touches ordinary food does not make it tamei. Doesn't make it tamei. Once he's already immersed in the mikveh, it will not affect the food. But since he is not yet fully tar, he's not fully tar until the next day, which means until nightfall, any truma or kodesh that he touches does become pasul, which means that it may not be eaten, but it cannot transmit tumah to something else. Okay, that's a very important thing to understand here. The tvul yom who touches the truma, he invalidates it, makes it pasul. You're not allowed to eat it. But were it to touch another piece of truma, it would not affect it. That's the case here, very specific to this case of tvul yom. If a tvul yom touches a piece of food that is kodesh or truma, the entire piece of food becomes tamei. However, it cannot transfer tumah to anything else. Therefore, if a tvul yom touched one piece of food in a utensil full of truma, that piece alone becomes tamei, and the other remains tar, even if they were actually touching, since the tumah of the first piece cannot be transmitted further. Okay? So again, the tvul yom touches a piece of truma, another piece of truma touches it, it's not going to be affected, the other piece of truma that affected it. Not only that, if you'd have let's say you'd have a piece of carbon meat, a tvul yom touched it, and then another piece of carbon meat went and touched it, it would not be affected either. Our case is the following. They are all in one vessel. All the different pieces are in one vessel. You touch one piece of the tvul yom touches one piece of truma. Does it affect the other pieces? No. But in the case where you had pieces of carbon meat in one vessel, there we say this even if right. Here, the point is that in the case where the carbon meat is now in a vessel, although they're not one thing, the vessel combines them into one thing. The sages said if there's a vessel, if there's something that contains it, something that kind of brings it together, then we see them as one piece. And once we see them as one piece, if you touch one, the rest of them are affected. So this is the stringency here that this Mishna is saying by kodesh over truma. If you have pieces of truma in a vessel and the tvul yom touches one, the rest of them aren't affected. And the tvul yom touches one piece, we do consider the other piece is now impure, because since they're in one vessel, we see them as one unit. As one unit, you touch one, the rest of them become tamei. But that's not true by truma. That's another example of a stringency that we have regarding kodesh meat over truma. Okay, we'll continue the rest tomorrow.
Now, how can you?
Let's finish up with Chofetz Chaim now. All right, so the first half of the halacha that we started yesterday, which was Klal Gimel, chapter 3, Zayin, halacha 7, was that if you see someone do an act, and the act can be judged favorably or unfavorably, you can give the person benefit of doubt or not. So the Chofetz Chaim said, if we're talking about a God-fearing person who did this act, even if the situation lends itself more to say he did something wrong, if we're talking about a God-fearing person, then you're obligated to give him the benefit of the doubt. Then the Chofetz Chaim says, let's say he's from the people in the middle. Sometimes they slip up. Generally, they try to stay in line, and they do, but sometimes they stumble. So then the Chofetz Chaim says like this: if it's 50-50, if this act has can be judged 50-50, it's 50%. Again, it's even. The way of interpreting it, whether positive or negative, is even. Then you have to give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that what he did was not wrong. As our sages state, one who judges his friend favorably, Hashem will then judge you favorably. And this becomes included in that which the Torah says, with righteousness you shall judge your friend. That means judge him righteously. Say that he's righteous. And even if, let's say, we're talking about it's leaning more towards the negative about what he did, it's very appropriate to leave it at least in a doubt. And not to judge him negatively. In a situation where things are leaning to the positive side. In that situation, you for sure cannot judge him negatively. But he does so, doesn't give him the benefit of the doubt. And because of that, you went and spoke Lashon Hara about him, meaning you said he did this thing. Besides for transgressing the Torah's principle of judging your friend righteously, he has also transgressed the prohibition of speaking Lashon Hara. So he's basically saying that if you have a person who's a Beinoni, he's in the middle. He sometimes does what's right and sometimes slips up. If this is a act that is 50-50, whether he did right or wrong, the Chofetz Chaim uses the word he doesn't use the word chayiv, obligated. He says he needs to judge him, to give him the benefit of the doubt. And if you do that, you're included in what the Torah says, judge your friend righteously. Sounds like he's obligated. Then he says, if let's say it's leaning more towards the negative, you should still give him that. You should at least, it says, consider it a doubt. Don't judge him. Don't judge him. Now, in a situation where the act is leaning more positively and he's in the middle of the road kind of person, he says, where then he says the body in that situation where it is leaning more towards the positive, it's for sure forbidden to judge him negatively, and then you speak Lashon Hara based on that. That's called you didn't give him the benefit of the doubt when you had to, and you also spoke Lashon Hara. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
How do we know if someone is doing something